Hey guys, welcome to Perpetuality. I've covered this watch before. These are the Marinemaster 200, and this is in the last couple of videos that I did. Now, today we'll be building up on these watches because it is Seiko's 140th anniversary, and they've decided to celebrate with these two verdant green dial variants of the MM200 and the 300. Based off of Iriomote Island, which is an island in Japan known for its verdant landscape, unique fauna. This is usually Seiko's motif. They take inspiration from nature, from the mountains and surroundings. And we see that influence very strongly on the dial. Seiko is no stranger to green dials. I feel like that's the color they do extremely well. Take for example the cocktail time, the recent ones I've covered, even down to the actual Alpinist and the Sharp Edge. There seems to be a bit of uniqueness and sharpness to the green dials that Seiko does that just seems to be very captivating. Now I won't bore you with specifications because I've covered these watches before, but I'll lay them on the screen for you guys to get an understanding of where they're different and why they matter to you. Bottom line is that there's a reason why both of them coexist and why Seiko would release them even though they look so similar. And among those biggest differences is in the mid case. The MM200 is actually 12.5 millimeters thin compared to the 15.4 or 8, I'll correct myself here, of the Marinemaster 300. The beating heart of these watches, well, starting off with the SLA047, is the caliber 8L35. It is a Grand Seiko movement. It does beat at 28,800 vibrations per hour, and it does have power reserve of 50 hours. The overall accuracy is impressive with this. Now, with that being said, the caliber 6R35 found inside of the Marinemaster 200 is no slouch. It actually has better power reserve of 70 hours. Accuracy is not as good, being closer to 15 to about 25 seconds out. In terms of the time grapher, I've actually measured it at around 8 to 10 seconds per day. And that's on resting the watch face down. Nobody does a green dial like Seiko does when it comes down to their regular run-of-the-mill watches, but these are not regular, these are limited edition pieces. And take note, when Seiko does do green dials, they do them really well. There's a faint graining to this green dial that you see on the MM200. The printing is sharp. The indices, although stamped, not applied, are well done, well polished. Even the lume seems to be evenly applied with no delineation whatsoever. Of course, the green dial is meant to give us a feeling that we are in Iriomote Island with the actual green hue of the lagoons and the verdant trees that line the landscape. Do you get this feeling when you look at this watch? Well, Seiko takes inspiration from nature, and rightfully so. There's lots to go by when you look at nature. That's usually lots of design and human manufacturing comes from nature itself too. The only thing I do have to say is that Seiko has done with this new indice, this kind of little rectangular indices sitting right next to the date. It looks out of place and it throws the dial out of balance. But however, the execution, the printing, the indices on both watches, the hand finishing, all done to a fine degree. Maybe just a hair a little bit more refined on the Marinemaster 300, and that begs the question, with the dial quality, what are you getting with the MM300? Well, how about this for starters? The lume is actually sunken in on the indices themselves, giving you depth that you don't have on the MM200. Now, both of these watches do stand out to be a little bit different and similar, with the MM300 offering you a ceramic bezel, still 120 clicks, and it is quite refined to use. You can see that there are audible detents to click it in place. The action is smooth, buttery smooth, it's really good. Overall, I feel like it matches the price point of this watch, the bezel feel, if you care about that. Now, for the purposes of this video, the overall bezel and it being ceramic is a nice quality for this watch. And I'm disappointed to find out that it's not ceramic on the MM200. Though bezel action is good, 120 clicks, it is not as refined feeling or reassuring as the MM300. And I think part of that goes down to the fact that these are supposed to be different watches after all. They represent different price points. The MM200 at under half the price of the Marinemaster 300. There are screw-down crowns that accompany both watches, with the MM300 having a more robust screw-down crown signed, good for 300 meters, and relative to the MM200 here, good for 200 meters, the crown is not at all signed, and you can tell from the mid-case that this is not meant for the same depth. Now that doesn't mean that the Marinemaster 200 is inferior in any way. It does represent the price point that it's going for, and keep in mind that you can find this watch for almost half, and sometimes a little bit less than half, than the Marinemaster 300. Being limited edition is kind of an interesting subject. We'll touch on that in just a moment. But before we do that, let's take a look at the case. Now, the case on both of these watches are unique. They do look similar when you glance at them, but they are different. The Marinemaster 200 has a Zaratsu polished line on the mid case with brushed finishing at the top of the lugs, and then it gets separated with this fine brushed line that has these drilled lug holes to accompany these bracelets that you'll see in these watches. It's a very helpful feature. And then at the bottom, there is another Zaratsu polished section of the underbelly of the case. This kind of nice curvature that looks like a sports car to me, actually. It's very, very elegant. The bracelet is solid, mostly brushed finishing with a three-piece construction. It tapers ever so slightly from the 20mm lugs. Then as you see, moving over to the clasp, it is a simple fold-over mechanism with a actual 2-button deployant, as you see here. And within the 2-button deployant, the construction is relatively solid. It is not shaky or jittery or jangly at all. It's quite solid, in my honest opinion. The watch does have a half a link extension, or this rather a link extension that comes out. It's not the easiest to use because you really have to open up the clasp and then pry it open from the inside. I didn't do it here because it's just a nightmare to do it on camera. It's not my favorite system, guys, but you can see as I move it in, it actually clicks into place under the clasp just like that. It can be definitely something that can be improved upon on Seiko's perspective. I get why Seiko has done this for the differentiation between the MM300 and 200, and the lower price point makes sense too. I don't feel disappointed with this bracelet with its solid end lengths and its construction at all. It is, relatively speaking, a great bracelet for the money. The Marinemaster 300 is a more refined beast, if I can say that. The overall feeling of the bracelet is nothing like the MM200. It's much more reassuring. To the attachment of where the end links are, to the finishing of the bracelet, just superior. As you can see that the actual finishing, that under flank of the side of the case right there, is Zaratsu polished, along with the top side of the mid case. Then at the top side of the lugs, it's brush finishing just like the MM200. The bracelet differs a little bit with its three-piece construction, but there is a gentle polished line separating the links. Then moving over to the clasp, it is still a fold-over mechanism, rather reminiscent of the MM200, but this is the party trick. You have this extension that you can click out by pulling on one part of the clasp, and then you can ratchet it out to get the comfort you want. This is extremely helpful if you're going to be wearing this watch in the summertime, or even if you're diving with it on a wetsuit. It makes perfect sense. I would love to see this on the Marinemaster 200. And this overall ties the Marinemaster 300 together as a higher end piece. These watches wear incredibly well, even though their larger diameter might suggest otherwise. The Marinemaster 200, with its 42mm case and its 48mm lug-to-lug length, sits really well on my 6¼ inch wrist. I'm actually quite surprised, and part of that is down to how thin it is. I feel like this is one of the better wearing watches that Seiko has released in terms of divers. Now mind you, the Marinemaster 300 differs. It's much taller and much longer lug-to-lug length, 50mm lug length actually, and about over 15mm thick in terms of the mid case. It does sit tall and wide, but the funny thing is, it's not unbearable. I'm surprised at how good this watch wears on the wrist. What are my final impressions on these watches? Well, I have to address the elephant in the room. Seiko is releasing 6,000 pieces of the Marinemaster 200 as limited edition, and 3,000 pieces of the Marinemaster 300 in my hand here. And when we say limited edition, I feel that Seiko has really been oversaturated with limited edition variants lately. I seem to find one pop up from my retailer every so often, and I question if it's really limited sometimes. The other fact of the matter is that it's a little bit overdone. They've done green dials before. The SLA047, well, there was a previous Marinemaster 300 variant that had the same green dial but with a green bezel instead, and that was released a couple years back. The Marinemaster 200, however, this is a new color for it, and I would love to see it as a non-limited edition. This green dial should be a staple in the collection. I feel that there's no differences aside from the dial color to warrant the limited edition. Down to the packaging, it's just about the same. Now, of course, with that being said, thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll show you the lume right here, and the lume on both these watches are excellent. The Marinemaster 300 has Seiko's proprietary Lume Bright, and as you can see, it's evenly applied. It does shine quite brightly. It is fairly reactive as well. The overall bezel is lumed for the first quarter gradation as well. So it's kind of unique to see this on a Seiko diver. They usually don't lume the bezels. On the flip side, the Marinemaster 200 also has Seiko's proprietary Lume Bright, and it does have an equal amount of even Lume Bright applied to the dial. And I can see that overall the indices are smaller, so the lume looks less pronounced than the Marinemaster 300. Not at all disappointing though, because the longevity and the usefulness of the lume is still the same as the Marinemaster 300. It's overall great execution.